The afternoon sun stretched across the small suburban neighborhood, painting golden streaks over neatly trimmed lawns, white picket fences, and the sound of cicadas buzzing lazily in the trees. Children's laughter carried faintly from a block away, where a group of kids rode bikes up and down the street. But in the quiet corner lot at the end of Drive, a young girl named knelt in the grass with her golden retriever, Max. Was only 11, but she already carried herself with a kind of calm confidence that made her seem older. She had a tangle of chestnut-brown hair pulled back into a messy ponytail, and a pair of green eyes that sparkled with energy whenever she was outside. In her hands, she held a bright red tennis ball, Max's favorite toy. "Ready?" she asked, though the question was mostly rhetorical. Max stood poised in front of her, his fur gleaming under the sun like strands of molten gold. His ears perked, his tongue lolled out, and his tail swept back and forth like a pendulum on overdrive. He knew what was coming. Pulled her arm back dramatically and flung the ball as far as she could across the yard. Max bolted after it like a flash of lightning, his muscles rippling under his coat, his paws pounding the ground with practiced grace. A soft laugh bubbled out of as she watched him. Every time he chased that ball, it was like the first time, full of joy, determination, and heart. He returned moments later, chest heaving, ball clamped between his teeth. Dropping at its feet, he looked up at her expectantly. She grinned, picked it up, and tossed it again, her laughter ringing out. To the casual passerby, the scene looked like nothing more than a girl and her dog enjoying the sunshine. A neighbor walking their pug glanced over, smiled warmly, and kept walking. But beneath the surface of that cheerful simplicity was something most people never noticed. And Max shared a secret. For years had worked with Max to create a silent language of her own. It started as a game when she was 7, an idea sparked after she watched a movie where a spy used hand signals to communicate silently with his team. Wondered, could I do that with Max? She began experimenting, rewarding him with treats whenever he responded to the smallest gesture, a tilt of her head, a flick of her wrist, a subtle tap of her foot. To her parents, it looked like harmless play, just another way their imaginative daughter bonded with her pet, but took it seriously. Over time, those experiments turned into a system. Max began to recognize the difference between a casual scratch of the arm and a purposeful movement of fingers. He learned that when brushed her hand against her hip, it meant stay. When she pressed her thumb against her palm, it meant quiet. And when she pointed without moving her body, it meant watch. Now at 11 and Max were more than companions. They were a team. As the game of fetch went on, lay back in the cool grass, resting her head against the earth as Max bounded across the yard again. She closed her eyes, listening to his paws drum the ground, to the rhythm of his panting breath. She felt safe here, in the little world they shared. The smell of fresh-cut grass filled the air, mixing with the faint sweetness of blooming flowers from the neighbor's garden. A drone a few houses down, and somewhere a sprinkler ticked rhythmically. Yet all of it blurred into background noise compared to the sound of Max's playful energy. "Good boy," she whispered as he returned, dropping the ball gently into her lap. His tongue lolled as if he were smiling. She scratched behind his ears, her fingers sinking into the soft fur. He leaned into her touch, eyes half closing in bliss. What didn't know was that this ordinary day was about to become anything but ordinary. But for now, the world was calm. Max suddenly froze, lifting his head. His ears twitched, his body stiffened. Noticed immediately, she always did. She sat up, following his gaze. A car had just rolled slowly down the street and parked a few houses away. Nothing unusual, perhaps. Cars parked in their neighborhood every day, but Max's instincts rarely lied. Brushed the thought aside, focusing instead on another throw. She wanted to hold onto the peace of the afternoon, not let her imagination run wild. After all, Max sometimes got jumpy about squirrels or delivery drivers. Still, a little shiver ran through her, though she couldn't explain why. She stood and brushed the grass from her shorts. Max trotted beside her, still alert but obedient, took a deep breath, telling herself everything was fine. The yard around her seemed so familiar, so safe. The little white house behind her, with its flower boxes under the windows, had always been her sanctuary. Her mom's wind chimes tinkled softly near the porch. The flag on the mailbox fluttered in a gentle breeze. She was home, where nothing bad ever happened. Yet Max's behavior stuck with her. He was a dog who rarely barked without reason. Crouched again, stroking his fur. "It's okay, Max," she whispered, though her words carried more reassurance for herself than for him. He looked back at her, eyes steady, as if to say, "Trust me." And she always did. The game resumed, but the air had shifted. Sensed it, though she couldn't name it. She laughed and ran as Max chased after her, the two of them circling the yard in playful bursts of energy. To any observer it looked like carefree fun. Yet every so often Max glanced toward the street, watchful, protective. Noticed but chose not to worry. She was a child, after all, and children cling to comfort when they can. Still, deep down, something stirred, an instinct of her own, a whisper that the ordinary day was not so ordinary after all. The shadows stretched longer across the lawn as the sun dipped slightly lower in the sky. Picked up the ball once more, preparing for another throw. Max crouched low, ready to launch forward. She smiled, the bond between them glowing brighter than ever. It was in that moment, just as the ball left her hand, arcing high into the sunlight, that the first sign of trouble appeared. But didn't see it yet. To her, it was still just another throw, another laugh, another moment in the comfort of an afternoon that seemed like it would last forever. Had always felt that Max was more than just a dog. From the day he was brought home as a golden-furred puppy, he had imprinted himself on her life in a way she couldn't quite explain. She was 4 years old then, so small she could barely hold his squirming body in her lap. Yet the moment their eyes met, her wide and curious, his bright and trusting, something invisible linked them. In the years that followed, that link only grew stronger. Max followed everywhere. When she toddled across the living room, Max's clumsy paws padded right behind her. When she learned to ride her first bike, Max ran alongside, tongue lolling, barking encouragement as though he understood the triumph of balance. At night, when lay tucked beneath her blankets, Max curled up at the foot of her bed, a living guardian against the dark. Her parents often remarked on the connection. "He's more like her shadow than a pet," her father would say, shaking his head with a smile, and her mother would laugh softly, adding, "It's like he understands her better than anyone else does." They weren't wrong. By the time was 7, she had begun noticing little things about Max. If she tilted her head a certain way, he'd cock his in the same direction. If she paused at the front door, he'd sit automatically, waiting for her next move. It was as if he were always studying her, memorizing her smallest cues. One rainy afternoon, bored and restless, sat on the carpet with Max sprawled beside her. The patter of raindrops against the window filled the silence. That was when she had the idea. "What if we had our own secret code?" she whispered to him. Of course, Max didn't answer, but he thumped his tail once, as though approving the thought. Began experimenting. She tapped her knee twice, and when Max lifted his head curiously, she rewarded him with a treat. She waved her fingers subtly, and when he moved closer, she clapped in delight. Each attempt wasn't perfect, but slowly patterns formed. Over the next weeks, she refined her signals. A flick of her wrist meant come. A touch of her shoe to the ground meant sit. A tap of her shoulder meant stay. The first time Max responded consistently without a word spoken, felt a rush of pride. It wasn't just training, it was communication, quiet and secret, something no one else shared. Her parents noticed her persistence but didn't discourage it. "If it keeps you busy and helps Max learn, why not?" her dad said, shrugging. They figured it was a phase, like the time she had tried teaching her stuffed animals how to dance. But knew better. She could feel the difference in the way Max looked at her, the way he seemed to wait, not for commands but for understanding. By the age of 9, their secret code had grown into a true language, had signals for nearly everything. Stay close, hide behind me, be quiet, fetch the ball, even watch someone carefully. Max responded with remarkable accuracy and began to trust that in almost any situation, her silent partner would know what she meant. Sometimes she tested him in front of friends. When they played in the backyard, she'd give Max a barely noticeable motion, a shift of her hand or a blink, and he'd act, leaving her friends astonished. "Whoa, how'd you do that?" One of her classmates gasped when Max barked on cue without speaking a word. Only smiled. "We just understand each other." What she didn't reveal was the hours she had spent perfecting those signals. It wasn't easy. Max made mistakes, and so did she. Sometimes he barked when he was supposed to stay quiet, or sat when she meant for him to fetch. But every failure was followed by patience, encouragement, and more practice. She never scolded harshly, never lost her temper. Their language was built not on fear, but on love and trust. And that made all the difference. As approached 11, the bond had matured into something almost uncanny. Max seemed to sense her moods before she even expressed them. When she came home from school upset, he padded over and pressed his warm body against her legs without needing a signal. When she was happy, he pranced beside her, wagging as if sharing her joy. When she felt nervous, he became alert, scanning the world as though ready to shield her. It wasn't just obedience anymore, it was empathy. Neighbors often commented on Max's loyalty. That dog would follow her into a burning building if he had to, Mrs. Henderson next door once said, watching the pair play, had giggled, but deep down she believed it. Her parents, too, began to notice that Max treated differently than anyone else. He obeyed them, of course, but his behavior went beyond obedience. It was almost protective, as though he recognized her not just as his owner but as his equal, his partner. Cherish this. To her, Max was just a dog. He was her best friend, her secret keeper, her co-conspirator in endless adventures. And in a world where she sometimes felt small and powerless, especially as the youngest in her family, her bond with Max gave her strength. Sometimes at night she would lie awake, stroking his fur, whispering things she never told anyone else. "I think you understand me better than people do," she'd say softly. And though Max couldn't speak, his steady breathing, the warmth of his body at her side, was answer enough. What didn't realize was how crucial this bond would become. Because soon, a situation would arise where words would fail her, where no one would be close enough to help, where her safety would depend on nothing more than a hidden signal and the dog who had spent his life learning how to read her heart. For now, though, the bond remained their secret. It was a game, a comfort, a magical link between a girl and her golden retriever. Loved the thought that it made them unique, that no one else in the world shared what they did. And though she couldn't know it yet, that uniqueness was about to save her in ways that would leave everyone else stunned. The sun had started to dip lower in the sky, casting a warm orange glow over Drive. Long shadows stretched across the neat sidewalks, and the usual hum of suburban life filled the air. The faint of the bark of a distant dog, the laughter of children pedaling bikes down the street. It was the kind of evening that made everything seem peaceful, ordinary, safe. Sat cross-legged in the grass, tossing the red ball for Max one more time. He sprinted across the yard, bounding joyfully after it, his golden coat shimmering in the fading light. She giggled when he skidded on the grass to snatch the ball in his mouth, then trotted back to her, proud of his catch. But as he dropped the ball into her lap, Max didn't sit like he normally would. Instead, his ears flicked upward, his body stiffened, and his eyes focused beyond the yard. Frowned following his gaze. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just the quiet street, the familiar houses lined up neatly with trimmed hedges and flower beds. But then her eyes caught movement at the far end of the block. A man was walking slowly toward her side of the street. There was nothing inherently alarming about a man taking a walk. Neighbors strolled through the area all the time, but something about this figure felt different. His steps weren't casual. His hands were shoved deep into the pockets of a dark jacket despite the warm air. His head tilted downward, yet every so often he glanced up in sharp, assessing movements. His heart gave a small, uneasy flutter. She tried to brush it off. Maybe he was just someone visiting a neighbor. Maybe he was lost. Kids were often warned about stranger danger, but most strangers turned out to be harmless. Still, something in her gut whispered that this wasn't the same as waving at Mrs. visiting cousin or the friendly delivery driver who sometimes handed her a lollipop. Max's growl broke through her thoughts, low, rumbling, protective. Placed a hand on his back, her small fingers brushing through his fur. "It's okay, boy," she whispered automatically, though her words lacked confidence. Max didn't relax. If anything, his body grew tenser, his muscles taut like coiled springs. The man was closer now, walking along the edge of the sidewalk, eyes flicking from side to side. He didn't seem to notice the kids farther down the street or the family setting out lawn chairs on their porch. His gaze kept drifting towards yard. Her pulse quickened. She thought of her parents inside, unaware that anything was wrong. She could call for them, but something stopped her. Part of her didn't want to overreact. Another part wanted to trust herself to see if her instincts were right. After all, she wasn't exactly alone. Max was with her, steady and alert. The man crossed the street now, moving closer to her side. He was still several houses away, but could see him more clearly. His jacket looked worn and too heavy for the season. His shoes scuffed against the pavement. Most unsettling of all was his expression, not friendly, not neutral, but calculating, as if measuring the distance between them. His mouth went dry. Her mind raced through what her parents had told her about strangers. Never talk to them. Never go anywhere with them. Trust your instincts. She glanced at Max. His eyes were locked on the man, every sense sharpened, waiting, felt her fear settle into determination. She remembered the secret signals they had practiced for years. She had never used them in a real-life situation like this. But maybe, just maybe, today was the day it mattered most. The man slowed his pace as he reached the house 2 doors down. He hesitated, as if pretending to look at the garden there, but his eyes kept sliding back too. Her skin prickled. The yard that had always felt safe now seemed too open, too exposed. She shifted slightly closer to Max, her fingers brushing against her side in what might have looked like a nervous fidget. But Max noticed. His body tensed even further, awaiting her next move. His heart hammered, but outwardly she tried to stay calm. She told herself she wasn't powerless. She had Max, and more importantly, she had their secret. The man took a few more steps forward. He was now directly in front of her yard, separated only by the low white picket fence. He paused there, eyes flicking from Max too. "Nice dog," he said suddenly, his voice gravelly and strained. Froze, she didn't answer. Her father had told her once, "You don't owe strangers a conversation." The man smirked faintly, as if her silence were a challenge. His hand twitched in his pocket. Max growled again, louder this time. His stance widened, his tail rigid, his teeth just barely visible. His breath caught. She knew the signals mattered now more than ever. If she panicked, Max would sense it. If she screamed too soon, she might lose the advantage of surprise. So instead, she steadied herself, hiding her trembling hands against her side. Then slowly, she gave the signal. It was small, so small that to the untrained eye it looked like nothing more than a child adjusting her shirt. But Max knew. He always knew. His body shifted instantly from wary to ready. The man, oblivious, stepped closer to the fence. His eyes narrowed as if deciding whether to lean in to speak again or to do something worse. And in that instant, his ordinary day shattered. The man's presence at the edge of the yard pressed down on like a shadow. Though he hadn't stepped past the picket fence, his nearness made her skin crawl. His words, "nice dog," hung in the air, sharp and uncomfortable, not like the friendly greetings of neighbors she was used to. Something about the way he said it made her stomach twist. Max hadn't taken his eyes off him. His growl vibrated low, deep in his chest, a sound that warned of action just beneath the surface. His golden fur bristled as his body leaned slightly forward, ready to spring if needed. Swallowed hard, every instinct screamed that something wasn't right. She remembered all the times her parents had warned her, "Trust your feelings. If someone makes you uncomfortable, listen to that." And right now her feelings were clear. This man didn't belong here. But fear alone wouldn't protect her. Pressed her palm against her thigh, her fingers curling in the subtle gesture she had practiced hundreds of times with Max. To anyone else, it would look like nothing more than a nervous tic. But Max understood. His growl deepened, shifting from uncertainty to focus. The man tilted his head slightly, watching, then Max. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "He's a big one," the man muttered. "Bet he's protective." Said nothing. Her silence wasn't just defiance, it was strategy. She knew if she spoke, her voice might crack and reveal the fear she worked so hard to hide. Max barked once, sharp, explosive, commanding. The sound made the man flinch back half a step, though he quickly recovered. "Easy there," the stranger muttered, glancing nervously around as though to check if anyone was watching. But the street had grown quieter in the last few minutes. The kids on their bikes had disappeared around the corner. The family with lawn chairs had stepped inside. The world suddenly felt far too empty. His chest tightened. This was exactly the kind of moment she had always imagined when practicing her secret signals with Max, those pretend games where she pictured herself as a spy, giving silent orders to her loyal partner. Only now it wasn't pretend. Now it was real. She took a small step backward, closer to the center of the yard. Without looking at Max, she shifted her hand again, just slightly, brushing her thumb across her palm. That was the signal for guard. Max immediately moved, stepping forward until his body stood squarely between and the man at the fence. His posture wasn't playful anymore. His tail was stiff, his ears pinned back, his chest puffed out with authority. He barked again, louder this time, a sound that carried down the block. Could feel her heart pounding, but seeing Max respond so instantly gave her courage. He wasn't just a dog, he was her protector, her partner. The man's eyes flicked around again, clearly unsettled by the intensity of Max's reaction. "Quiet down," he hissed in a low voice, though the edge of unease crept into his tone. But Max didn't quiet down. He stayed firm, barking in short bursts, each one echoing with the strength of a dog that wouldn't back down. His body was tense but steady, his presence radiating authority far beyond his size. Remembered her father's words, "Most people won't mess with a barking dog, it's too risky, too loud." Still, she didn't relax. The man hadn't left yet. He lingered as if weighing his options. His eyes narrowed. She made another motion, this one so subtle she doubted even the wind could detect it, 2 fingers brushing against her hip. "Watch him," the signal said. Max's barking paused just long enough for him to issue a low, menacing growl. His eyes locked onto the man's face, unblinking, unwavering. The effect was startling. The man took another half step back, his earlier false confidence slipping. Saw the shift in his posture, the nervous shuffle of someone who realized he had underestimated the situation. For a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. The breaths came fast, her fists clenched at her sides. She wasn't sure what would happen next. Would the man leave? Would he try to push past the fence? Every possibility spun through her mind at once. But in the midst of it all, she felt strangely steady. Her signals were working. Max was with her. The hidden language they had built in secret, those countless afternoons of practice, the mistakes, the patience, the persistence, were now her shield. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't begged. Instead, with just a few small gestures, she had turned her golden retriever into a wall of protection that no one could ignore. The man scowled, his eyes darting toward the houses on either side. A curtain in the Hendersons' living room twitched as someone peeked out, drawn by Max's barking. Another door down the street creaked open slightly. The man's lips pressed together in frustration. He muttered something under his breath, couldn't hear what, but then he stepped back fully from the fence. Max followed his movement with his entire body, barking again, his deep voice booming through the quiet evening. The man turned quickly on his heel, walking briskly away, his shoulders hunched. Didn't move until he was halfway down the block. Only then did she let out the breath she had been holding. Her knees felt weak, but she forced herself to stay upright. She reached down and brushed her hand against Max's back, giving him the soft signal for good job. Max's barking stopped instantly. He turned his head slightly toward her, ears perked, eyes bright. It was as though he was asking, "Did I do it right?" Smiled shakily, her throat tight with relief. "Yes, boy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You did perfect." Max wagged his tail once, just enough to show he understood. But his eyes never fully left the man, who was now nothing more than a shrinking figure in the distance. Stayed rooted in place, stroking Max's fur as the adrenaline pulsed through her. She couldn't believe what had just happened. With only a hidden signal, she had commanded Max to stand guard, and he had done it flawlessly. Her ordinary day was gone. What had felt like a harmless game between a girl and her dog had just proven itself in the real world, in the most terrifying way possible. And though was still trembling, she knew one thing for certain. No one would ever look at Max or her the same way again. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink into silence, except for Max's growls reverberating through the yard. His heartbeat thudded in her ears, each pulse sharp and insistent. The man lingered just a few feet beyond the picket fence, his eyes darting nervously between the golden retriever blocking the girl and the faint stirrings of neighbors behind their windows. It was only a few seconds, 10 at most, but to it felt endless. Max's body was taut, a wall of fur and muscle standing firm against the stranger. His chest rumbled with steady growls, deep and resonant. Every time the man twitched or shifted, Max barked sharply, the sound echoing like a warning siren through the neighborhood. The man's face hardened, his jaw tightening. He looked less confident now, his bravado slipping. Yet he didn't retreat fully either. Instead, he stayed, almost testing the boundary, as if daring to see just how much force this 11-year-old girl and her dog could muster. His palms were slick with sweat, though her fingers still hovered near her side, ready to signal Max again. She remembered everything she and Max had practiced. She could command him to chase. She could make him circle. She could even instruct him to stay perfectly still. But she knew every signal carried risk. The wrong move could escalate things. So she held steady. The air around her seemed thicker, heavier, as though the entire block was holding its breath. A curtain snapped back into place across the street. A car engine started faintly in the distance. Somewhere, a dog barked in response to Max's warning, but still, the moment lingered. The man muttered something under his breath. Couldn't hear all the words, but one phrase floated across the yard. "Stupid mutt." Her eyes narrowed. Before fear could creep too far, she brushed her fingers lightly across her thigh, just once. Max's growl deepened, louder, more menacing. He stepped forward, paws heavy against the earth, closing the gap between him and the fence. His lips curled just enough to show his teeth. The man froze, his bravado cracking further. He stepped back, only a pace, but it was enough to make his chest unclench slightly. Still, she didn't relax. Seconds dragged like hours. She studied the man's every movement, her heart hammering, adrenaline pouring through her veins. She wasn't sure if she'd scream for her parents, if she'd run, or if she'd keep relying on Max's signals. What she did know was that Max hadn't failed her yet. "Quiet dog," the man said harshly, his voice low, his eyes flicking again toward the street. "You're scaring people." Almost laughed bitterly, though fear held the sound in her throat. Max wasn't the one scaring people, he was. The man shifted, as though about to step forward again. Instantly moved her hand in a subtle, sweeping motion against her side. "Guard, do not yield." Max lunged toward the fence, barking furiously. His claws scraped the ground, his chest vibrating with sound. The intensity of his presence was undeniable, primal. The man recoiled, stumbling half a step back. For the first time, fear flickered openly in his eyes. He glanced around quickly, noticing the Hendersons' blinds twitch again, noticing a porch light flick on down the street. His shoulders tensed, like someone realizing he was moments away from losing control of the situation. His chest swelled with something she hadn't expected: pride. She wasn't just a scared little girl anymore. She was someone who had trained for this moment without ever knowing it. She had power, not because of force or shouting, but because of the quiet bond she had built with Max. Still, the tension wasn't over. The man lingered, hesitating, his body caught between fight and flight. The seconds dragged on, each one more unbearable than the last. Legs trembled, though she stayed rooted behind Max. She could hear her own breathing, shallow but steady, feel her pulse thrumming against her fingertips. It was in those unbearable seconds that realized just how close danger had crept into her safe world. She wasn't imagining things. She wasn't overreacting. The man's every movement confirmed it. He didn't belong here, and he hadn't come with good intentions. She brushed her fingers once more against her palm, the signal for stay steady but ready. Max froze in place, no longer lunging but still fierce, still unyielding. His barks came slower now, timed and deliberate, like a soldier packing his warning shots. The man finally swore under his breath, shaking his head. His eyes met for a split second. Something unspoken passed between them, frustration, maybe even a trace of anger, but also defeat. Then he turned. Not a calm turn, not casual, but sharp and quick, like a man who had lost the upper hand. He strode back down the sidewalk, his steps faster than before, his shoulders tense. Didn't move. She stayed rooted in her yard, watching him go, her hand still pressed lightly against her side, her body trembling but her eyes fierce. Max didn't move either. His growls softened into steady panting, but his gaze tracked the man until he disappeared past the row of houses. And still, even then, didn't relax. The seconds that had stretched like hours left her dizzy, shaky, and overwhelmed. Her knees wobbled, and she lowered herself slowly to the grass, her hand gripping Max's fur for support. "It's okay, boy," she whispered finally, her voice trembling. "You did it. You kept me safe." Max turned his head slightly, looking at her with eyes that glowed with loyalty, as if to say, "I always will." The tension hung in the air even after the man was gone, lingering like a ghost. The yard didn't feel quite as safe anymore. The shadows seemed deeper, the silence heavier. But in those unbearable seconds of tension had discovered something powerful. She wasn't helpless. And neither was Max. The stranger's retreat should have ended the ordeal, but in truth, it was only the beginning. What had unfolded in his quiet front yard was no ordinary standoff. It was the kind of moment that forced people to question what they had just seen, to replay it again and again in their minds as if searching for some explanation that made sense. Because it wasn't just that Max had barked. Dogs bark all the time. It wasn't even that he had guarded. Any loyal dog might do that. No, what stunned everyone was the precision of it. The uncanny way Max seemed to act as if following an invisible script, one that only held in her hands. The man was barely out of sight when the first voice rang out from across the street. "My goodness, are you all right?" It was Mrs. Henderson, peeking out from behind her front window curtain. She had been one of the first to notice the commotion. The blinds rattled as she lifted them higher, her wide eyes locked on the girl and her dog. Swallowed, still shaky, but she nodded faintly. "I'm fine," she called back, though her voice wavered. By then, the porch light across the street flicked on and the Wilsons stepped outside. Mr. Wilson folded his arms, scanning the street, while his wife hurried down the porch steps. "We saw a man out here. What happened? Did he say something to you?" Before could answer, Max barked again, not with fear this time but with authority, as if to punctuate what had just occurred. His stance remained tall, his chest puffed, his eyes still fixed in the direction the man had gone. The Wilsons froze. Their eyes widened and then they looked at. "You," Mrs. Wilson stammered, "you told him to do that, didn't you?" Blinked. She hadn't shouted a command, hadn't spoken more than a few words since the ordeal began. Yet somehow it had been obvious to the adults watching. The dog wasn't acting randomly. He was responding exactly, decisively, to invisible cues. "I didn't say anything," whispered. "That's what we mean," Mrs. Wilson replied, astonished. "You didn't have to, he knew." Other neighbors began stepping out of their houses, drawn by the sound of barking and the sight of people gathering. Conversations rose in scattered bursts. "Did you see that?" He wasn't barking until she moved her hand. "I thought she was just fidgeting, but no," he responded. It was like watching a police K9 in action. His cheeks flushed. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, and she wasn't sure she wanted to be now. But Max stayed by her side, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. His steady presence anchored her. Mr. Wilson shook his head in amazement. "I've never seen anything like it. That dog didn't move until she signaled. Not once. And when he did, well, that man didn't stand a chance." Mrs. Henderson crossed the street, clutching her cardigan tightly around her. "It looked like magic," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Like the two of them were speaking some hidden language. Shifted uncomfortably, glancing down at Max. His tail wagged just slightly, but his eyes were still sharp, still on guard. She crouched beside him and ran her hand along his back, giving him the signal for safe now. Instantly his posture softened. His growls faded. He licked her hand, then sat down calmly as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The crowd gasped quietly. "Did you see that?" one neighbor whispered. She calmed him with just a touch. Another neighbor, Mr. muttered, "I've seen trained guard dogs before, but this is different. That dog wasn't just trained. He was listening to her." The attention was overwhelming. Wanted to shrink away, to retreat inside the safety of her house. But deep down, another feeling pushed through the nerves: pride. For years, she and Max had practiced in secret, building a bond that even her parents only half understood. And now, in front of everyone, that bond had proven itself in the most undeniable way. The Wilsons, the Hendersons, the family, every single neighbor who had peeked from their windows or stepped outside, stood frozen in awe. They hadn't just witnessed a dog protecting his owner. They had witnessed something more powerful. A young girl silently commanding her protector with nothing more than hidden signals. It was unbelievable. Mrs. Henderson pressed a hand to her chest. "I thought he was going to jump the fence," she said softly. "But then I saw the way you moved your hand. He didn't act until you told him to. And when you calmed him down, oh my heavens, he melted in an instant." The crowd murmured in agreement. Even Mr. Wilson, usually skeptical and gruff, nodded. "That wasn't luck. That was skill. Years of it, I'd wager." His parents appeared on the porch just then, alarmed by the commotion outside. Her mother hurried down the steps, her face pale. "What on earth? What happened?" His throat tightened. She wanted to tell the story, to explain everything, but her words tangled. Instead, she pointed in the direction the man had gone, then looked down at Max. Her father's jaw clenched as he pieced together what little he could from the neighbors' murmurs. "A man was here?" he asked sharply. "And Max, he protected her," Mrs. Wilson interrupted firmly, "like a soldier on command." His mother knelt, wrapping her arms tightly around her daughter. "Oh, thank God you're safe." She kissed the top of his head, trembling with relief. Max pressed closer to them, his body warm and solid. Hugged him back, burying her face into his fur. She didn't want to cry in front of everyone, but the tears pressed anyway, a mix of relief, fear, and pride. The neighbors lingered, murmuring in awe, repeating what they had seen. Some compared Max to police dogs. Others marveled at its composure. All of them agreed on one thing. It had been extraordinary, unlike anything they had ever witnessed. And those parents were shaken, even they couldn't deny it. They had always known their daughter shared a special bond with Max, but tonight, that bond had proven itself publicly, undeniably, in a way no one could dismiss. As the crowd slowly dispersed, conversations carried through the evening air, overheard bits and pieces. Unbelievable. Like something out of a movie. That dog's not just a pet, he's her partner. Sat quietly on the grass, Max at her side, her fingers still tangled in his fur. She was exhausted, every muscle trembling from the adrenaline crash. But as she leaned against Max, she knew something had changed. The world had just seen what she had always known. Her bond with Max wasn't ordinary, it was extraordinary. And the unbelievable moment they had just shared was only the beginning of a story that would be retold again and again. By her neighbors, by her parents, by anyone who had stood witness. What had once been their private secret was now a legend in the making. The night air carried a strange stillness once the neighbors drifted back to their homes. Porch lights clicked off one by one, blinds slid shut, and the murmur of voices faded. Yet the weight of what had happened lingered heavily in the yard. Sat on the grass with Max by her side, her small hands buried in his thick golden fur. His chest rose and fell steadily now, no longer taut with tension. The danger had passed, but its shadow clung stubbornly to her thoughts. Her parents had ushered her gently inside. The familiar smell of lavender soap and fresh-baked bread wrapped around her as the door closed, sealing her away from the uncertainty outside. But couldn't stop glancing back through the window, half expecting the stranger's silhouette to reappear under the... Her mother herself locking every door and window, double-checking each latch as though one more twist of the lock could undo the memory of the man at the fence. Her father paced near the front door, arms folded, jaw tight. He was the sort of man who usually had an answer for everything, but tonight even he seemed unsettled. Finally he crouched beside, his voice gentler than his stern expression suggested. "Pumpkin, tell me exactly what happened, from the beginning." Swallowed hard, leaning into Max for courage. She explained in halting words how the man had approached, how she'd felt that something was wrong, and how she'd given Max the hidden signals they had practiced for years. She described the way Max had responded, calm, precise, unwavering. Her father's eyes widened slightly. He had seen glimpses of their games before, but hearing it laid out so clearly with such gravity struck him differently. "So, you didn't say a word?" he asked. Shook her head, just the signals. Beside her, Max thumped his tail lightly against the floor, as if agreeing. Her father rubbed the back of his neck. "That's remarkable." Her mother, still trembling slightly, sat down and pulled into her arms. "It's also terrifying. What if Max hadn't been there? What if the man had?" She cut herself off, unwilling to finish the thought. Pressed her face into her mother's shoulder. For the first time since the ordeal, the tears came, hot and uncontrollable. All the strength she had held onto outside finally cracked in the safety of home. Max whined softly and rested his head against her knee, a silent reassurance that she wasn't alone. Her father exhaled, his voice low. "The important thing is she wasn't alone. That man picked the wrong yard to approach." He reached out, scratching Max gently behind the ears. "You saved her, didn't you, boy?" Max's eyes closed halfway, soaking in the praise. The family sat in quiet for a while, listening to the steady tick of the grandfather clock. The chaos of moments earlier now felt like a distant storm, still frightening, but safely beyond the horizon. Clung to Max, her small fingers tangled in his fur, feeling steadier with every beat of his heart. Eventually, her father stood and grabbed the phone. "I'm calling the police," he said firmly. "They need to know someone suspicious was hanging around." The call was brief but serious. Listen to her father's steady voice as he explained the situation. "Tall man, dark jacket, mid-30s, loitering near our property. My daughter was outside with our dog. Thank God the dog was there. Yes, others saw him. Yes, he left on foot. Please keep a patrol in the area tonight." When he hung up, the tension in his shoulders eased slightly, though his eyes still burned with a protective fire. "Everything going to be fine," he assured them. "We'll keep the lights on tonight. And Max," he looked down at the golden retriever with a newfound respect, "Max will keep watch." His mother smiled weakly, brushing his hair back. "I don't think there's a safer place in the whole neighborhood than right here with him." The words warmed his heart. She had always believed Max was special, but now her parents saw it too. Not just a playful pet, not just a loyal friend. Max was her guardian, her partner. Later that evening, after the patrol car rolled slowly past their street, sat curled on the couch with Max's head resting in her lap. She traced little circles behind his ears, her thoughts still buzzing. Her father broke the silence. "Do you realize what you two did out there tonight?" Tilted her head. "We scared him away." "You didn't just scare him away." He leaned forward, his voice low with awe. "You controlled the situation. With nothing but your signals, you and Max turned the tables. That man thought he was the threat, but he left here afraid of you." Blinked at him. She hadn't thought of it that way. But as the words sank in, something inside her shifted. She wasn't just a frightened little girl who happened to have a brave dog. She was part of a team that had stood its ground. Her mother squeezed her hand. "And that's why you're safe, because you believed in Max and Max believed in you." Tears welled in his eyes again, though this time they were different, softer, steadier. She hugged Max tightly, whispering into his fur, "Thank you, boy, thank you for everything." Max sighed contentedly, his tail swishing against the couch. To him it was simple. He hadn't acted out of training or duty. He had acted because was his world, and nothing, not even the shadow of danger, could change that. By the time bedtime came, felt calmer. Her father left a light burning in the hallway, and her mother checked the locks one last time, but wasn't afraid anymore. She climbed into bed with Max curling up at her feet, his warm weight anchoring her in safety. As her eyelids grew heavy, she thought back to the scene outside. The way the man had faltered, the way the neighbors had gasped, the way Max had moved like an extension of her own will. For the first time, she realized something extraordinary. She and Max weren't just practicing signals anymore. They had proven their bond in the real world, and it had made all the difference. That night, as the moonlight spilled across her quilt, drifted into sleep with a quiet certainty. She was safe. Her family was safe. And no matter what shadows the world held, Max would always be there, listening to the signals no one else could see. Safety had been restored, not just to her yard, but to her heart. The following morning, Drive felt quieter than usual. The street seemed to hold its breath, as if aware that yesterday's events had left an invisible mark on everyone who lived there. Birds chirped softly in the trees, and a faint breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass. But for everything had changed. Even the ordinary sights of her front yard, the picket fence, the flower beds, the mailbox, felt charged with significance. She stepped outside with Max at her heels, his golden coat glinting in the early sunlight. The morning air was crisp, carrying a sense of renewal, yet noticed something different in Max today. He moved with an unusual confidence, not just in his gait but in the way he regarded her. There was a quiet pride in his eyes, the same pride she felt in her own chest. Her parents followed behind, alert but more relaxed. The tension that had gripped them the night before had dissipated, replaced with a cautious optimism. His father carried a coffee mug, while her mother clutched a notebook in which she had scribbled notes about the ordeal. "You both did incredible things yesterday," her father said, crouching down to ruffle Max's ears. I can't imagine what would happen without you two working together." Mother smiled at her daughter. "It wasn't just bravery, it was trust, something only the two of you share. That bond, it saved the day." Blushed, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "I guess I never thought it would really matter outside our games," she said softly. "I mean, it was just a secret signal Max and I practiced." Her mother shook her head. "It mattered more than you know. People will talk about this. They already are." She glanced at the neighbor across the street who waved politely. "Your neighbors have seen it too. What you and Max did, well, it's something extraordinary." Exhaled, feeling the weight of their words. She looked down at Max, who had paused beside her, tail wagging gently. She knelt and scratched behind his ears. "You were amazing," she whispered. "I couldn't have done it without you." Max nudged her hand with his nose, a silent reply that needed no translation. The day passed quietly, but the sense of recognition lingered. As walked through the yard, she noticed subtle changes in the way neighbors looked at her. Mrs. Henderson smiled knowingly as she watered her flowers. Mr. tipped his hat from across the street. Even the Wilsons, usually reserved and formal, gave a nod of respect. It was as if the neighborhood collectively acknowledged something that couldn't be explained, an unspoken understanding that, and Max shared a connection beyond ordinary words. Later in the afternoons, father brought out a small notepad and pen. "You know," he began, "we've talked about how incredible this is, but maybe it's time to document it. Not for anyone else, just for you and Max. Someday, when you're older, you can look back and remember what you accomplished together." His eyes lit up. She took the pen, and with Max sitting loyally at her side, she began to write. "Max and I have a secret language. No one else knows it, but yesterday it saved us. He is my protector. I trust him with my life and he trusts me." As she wrote, Max rested his head on her lap, his presence steady and comforting. She could feel the bond between them solidifying even further, stronger, unshakable, and eternal. The afternoon sunlight shifted, casting long shadows across the yard. Paused, looking up at the sky. It was clear, bright, and limitless, a perfect canvas for the possibilities that lay ahead. She realized that while the frightening events had challenged them, they had also revealed something remarkable. She wasn't alone. Not ever. As the neighborhood children rode by, waving and calling greetings, smiled. Max barked softly in response, playful but calm, a signal that everything was truly safe. The memory of yesterday's tension and fear lingered, but it had been transformed into pride and gratitude. In the evening, and her parents decided to commemorate the day. They took photos of Max in the yard, recording his alert stance, his eyes bright and intelligent. They shared a quiet dinner, full of laughter and relief, as if reclaiming the peace that had been disrupted. Afterward, climbed into bed with Max curled at her feet. She stroked his fur slowly, whispering thanks for his courage. "You were amazing today," she murmured. "We did it together." Max sighed contentedly, resting his head on the blanket, his eyes half closed. In that moment, knew something beyond words. Their bond was permanent, unbreakable, and now undeniably heroic. As the moon rose over Drive, spilling silver light across the quiet neighborhood, thought about the lessons she had learned. Bravery wasn't about size or strength. It wasn't about being loud or noticeable. True bravery came from trust, understanding, and the courage to act together silently with someone who believed in you. And as she drifted to sleep, she dreamed not of fear, but of endless possibilities, adventures with Max, hidden signals, and a partnership that could face any challenge. The fear of yesterday was now a distant memory, replaced with certainty that the bond they shared was something extraordinary, something no one could ever take away. The story of that day would live on in her memory, in the neighborhood's whispers, and in the shared glances of those who had seen the unbelievable moment unfold. But more importantly, it would live on in her heart, and in Max's, as a testament to the power of love, trust, and loyalty. knew one thing with absolute certainty. The ordinary days, the ordinary walks, the ordinary games, they would never be the same. Every glance, every gesture, every silent signal now carried weight, meaning, and history. And together, and Max were ready for whatever the world might bring. Because their bond wasn't just special, it was unforgettable.